So before you throw allegations at me for being a furry, I ask you to consider the fact that sometimes when the love interest is a monster, it just makes things more fun. God forbid a girl is trying to have more fun. Sorry, I have been so bad with posting more consistently throughout this month. I'm dealing with a problem that I typically deal with throughout pretty much every day in my life, and that is called time management and discipline. And so recently that has become even more of a challenge because I ended up traveling with some friends to Italy and Portugal, and it was a really fun trip. Very hot over the summer, but it was still fun. And so I've just been like struggling to get back into routine and trying to like juggle the 3 jobs that I have. And so that's why this video has been a little bit late, but better late than never. Basically, I wanted to talk about the books that I have read recently over the past month. I ended up reading some really great romance books while I was traveling. One of them actually took place in Italy because my queen, Ali Slazewood, is also Italian. So I was really getting that authentic experience there. So I'm excited to share my thoughts on the great romance books I read. I also read a nonfiction, another weird monster romance that I don't know yet if I will make a video for, and a horror book that takes place in New York, which is very fitting for my return to New York. But at least we have AC. That is the one thing that I will give America credit for. Anyway, whenever I come back from traveling, I always have to deal with jet lag. So my plan to reset my sleep this summer is with Beam, the sponsor of today's video. I ordered a bunch of products from them, but the one that I'm most excited to start implementing is Dream. This is an all-natural sleep beverage that has improved 18 million nights of sleep. What caught my attention for this product is that they did a perception study where 97% of their customers reported an improved healthy nighttime routine. So I was like, okay, sold. I will try anything at this point because getting a good night's sleep has always been my personal struggle. It always takes me forever to fall asleep. So I've been trying it out this past week, and I love how easy it is to mix together the Dream powder before bedtime so that I can fall asleep faster and stay that way. The first night that I took it, it didn't really kick in for me, but then nights 2, 3, and 4, I would fall asleep within like 30 to 40 minutes. Yesterday was the only time this week where I skipped it, and I did not fall asleep as fast as I did on the Dream powder. So we are gonna keep this train going because clearly something is working here. I also recommend people to try it out if you like hot cocoa, because that is what the Dream powder tastes like to me, and it's just like the perfect way to feel like I have this cozy bedtime routine. If you want to try it out, you can save 40% off by using my code WithCindy. All you gotta do is go to shopbean.com/WithCindy to claim it. This includes free shipping and a free frother, and it is my first time using a frother. This is so fancy. Again, it's really enhancing my nighttime routine when I'm mixing this together. It literally takes like less than a minute. You have the option to pause or cancel anytime. So thank you to Beam for helping me save my sleep. And now let's talk about the books that I read this past month. First, we gotta start with my queen, Ali Slazewood. She released a new book this summer called Problematic Summer Romance. And every time she puts out a book, it is always a banger, even if the relationship is something that I don't typically go for. In this particular case, this is like an age gap romance, hence the title. I personally don't typically go for age gaps. It just never appealed to me. But the thing about Ali is that she will write a simp man down bad. And I think she wrote it in a way that made me easy to be into this age gap. Because for me, it wasn't really about the difference in their age. It was the fact that he was like angsting so hard about him being an older man. And he was so afraid of like being a problematic person, corrupting her or whatever. And then the main girl's like, no, dude, like we are literally both adults, it's chill. But the whole book, he's like, no, I can't do this to you, even though I want you so bad, but I'm gonna stay back. See, this is the kind of thing where like, maybe in real life, I'd be like, yeah, I don't trust any man, so I would be side-eyeing. But in a fictional safe space, especially characters written by Ali, I can fuck with it. So the setup for this book is that the main girl is a 23-year-old grad student, and the main guy is a 38 successful biotech guy. He's also her brother's best friend. So all these layers here are why the main guy believes that this romance is problematic, because the power dynamic is too imbalanced. Clearly, he has been reading too much online discourse, but I appreciate the sentiment. If only men in real life actually were wary about these things. So they had a moment like 3 years ago where they had run into each other as adults because they hadn't really seen each other since they were younger. They ended up really connecting with each other, and it was clear that there was like romantic inclinations going on, but then he ended up cutting it off. This made her heartbroken, but he believed that it was for the best. I don't know if you can hear this, but the police sirens are going outside my window right now. So clearly this was the situation that the main guy was trying to avoid, getting locked locked up. Although not really, because they were both adult age, but I get where he's coming from, because if I were in his shoes, I don't think I would be going for that kind of relationship either. But again, we are in fiction land, okay? So anyway, they haven't talked for like 3 years, and now the main girl's brother is getting married in Italy, so she is going to be seeing the main guy in this romantic Sicilian village. And as they reconnect again, she becomes more determined to really address the fallout of their relationship and try to rebuild it again. One of the things that she goes back and forth between the main guy is that she often argues how he isn't really acknowledging that she has her own agency, she can make her own decisions for herself. She's not some dumb girl that he is like taking advantage of. So they go back and forth with that. And I think it's one of those things where I don't know if it would work in real life. Obviously, it is dependent on each relationship and different circumstances and context, but in fiction, it definitely does, because obviously this fictional man is not a bad person. If anything, perhaps it's the green flag that he cares so much about her well-being over his own feelings for her. I think Ali does male yearning so well, and I think that contributed to how the sex scenes were so hot. I was a blushing and fanning myself while I was on that plane to Italy myself. I feel like why it enhances the sex scenes is because when this guy has been trying to hold himself back, and when you get to the sex scene, it's like this built up release, metaphorically and literally, that I just find really hot. And then there's this one point where he's like, I want to put a baby in you. And I'm like, sir, I don't even want kids. But you know, when you're just like horny and your brain isn't thinking properly, I was like on that boat with him. So I was like, okay, girl, you go ahead and make that imaginary Italian baby. Anyway, this book might not be for everyone, but it certainly was for me, and I had a good time. And then the next book that I read is another romance that I think might end up being one of my favorite books I've read this year. It's called Fan Service, and it is a paranormal rom-com that I had so much fun reading. And I think the reason why it's basically going to be like one of my favorites this year, if not like my favorite romance of the year, which was already like a hard bar to beat because I have read great romances throughout 2025. The whole reason why it gets to that #1 spot is because I am so biased, and it really tapped into that whole werewolf trope that I apparently am into. You know, I like my contemporary romances, I think they're cute, but then when you make one of them a monster, and now we're getting into monster fucker territory, it just really elevates the whole thing, okay? So before you throw allegations at me for being a furry, I ask you to consider the fact that sometimes when the love interest is a monster, it just makes things more fun. God forbid a girl is trying to have more fun. So the setup for this is that the main girl lives in a small town who she's always been an outcast to, because she's more of like a goth girl who is really into different fandoms. One of them in particular is this one fandom that was clearly based on Teen Wolf, but in this fictional world is called the Arcane Files, and this is a long-running werewolf detective show, and she is so obsessed for it that she is literally like the moderator for an online fan forum dedicated to this show. So she spent all of these years archiving fictional supernatural lore within the show, as well as having very intense analytical discussions about the main character and the star behind the show. This show has long ended, but it's still a cult classic in the same way that Teen Wolf is. I personally never got into Teen Wolf. I wasn't one of like the CW girlies, but even though I wasn't involved in that fandom or I'm not familiar with that show, I still really enjoyed this book. I found it still accessible to me, even as someone who missed out on the CW train. I think the book is still strong on its own, regardless of whether you are like a fangirl or not, because the way that it approached characterization of the two main characters and like the interiority that the characters have and their own struggles and what they're trying to figure out in their relationship, I thought it was all done so well. And I think also the fandom culture aspect, I would say I'm kind of like adjacent. I'm not really within fandom culture, but like I've seen the way that it plays out, and I think that the book is able to show it in endearing ways of how like this main character, and I guess even the actor too, like they were able to find community and figure out their identities through their love and enjoyment of different fandoms. For example, the main girl experienced a pretty bad fan interaction with the main guy when she visited him at a convention a long time ago when she was a teenager. It was one of those stories where like you should never meet your heroes. He was an ass. While it was disappointing, she still has love for the show, and she's made some of her best friends that she still has today through being in those fandom spaces. The main guy, on the other hand, is experiencing something much more complicated in present day, because now that it's been a while since the show has been off the air, him and his career has spiraled. He's basically like a washed up actor now. He's trying to like pitch for a spin-off series or to like reboot it again, but that hasn't really been gaining traction. And so the most complicated matter of all of this is that now he has been waking up naked in the woods outside of his LA home with no memory of the night before. And so it turns out that he himself has been turning into a werewolf. So he's desperate to figure out what the hell is going on, and he turns to the person that he believes is the expert of werewolf lore, which is the moderator of the fan forum for his show, aka the main girl of this book. So that is how they meet again years later from their initial bad fan interaction. He doesn't remember that happened a long time ago, but she does, and she doesn't tell him right away. They start to build like this allyship and then friendship, and then clearly they become like more attracted to each other. It's essentially a rom-com that takes place in a small town setting. You get into shenanigans of like a washed up actor and this goth outcast, and then you have the added supernatural bits to it where they're trying to figure out, how do we stop this guy from turning into a werewolf, or how do we like tame the beast? And I really gotta say, there is like this one part where they're going through these werewolf trials, and one of them is practicing like him chasing after her and having to like hold himself back. And again, I'm not someone who was like involved in the Teen Wolf fandom, or I guess like any werewolf lore in general. I'm not really familiar with the monster fucker territory, despite, you know, what people may assume. But I guess chasing is a thing when it comes to these supernatural romances, and the chasing scene in this book was so fucking hot. I literally bookmarked it so that I could listen to the audiobook more than once. The tension that was built up was done so well, because obviously they're just doing this as like an experiment to try to help him tame his urges, and it was just done so well. And that is why I think that this will be the #1 romance book for me this year. And even though the main girl is like a fan of the show and the main guy is like the actor, I didn't really feel the power imbalance. Maybe it's because he's like a washed-up actor at this point. I felt like she had a good head on her shoulders with trying to like navigate this new relationship that was forming with him. And I really liked their dynamic. It was very much like black cat for her and golden retriever for him. And they were really cute. And I think overall it was just like a sweet small town romance that just happened to have really hot paranormal twists to it. And now unfortunately we must go to the next book, which was not so sweet in comparison. And that is Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zeng. The reason why I say it's not so sweet is because rather than a romance, it is a horror, specifically about the hate crimes against Asian Americans during the pandemic. The way that the book starts, immediately from the first chapter, like I came into it, as I come into many books, not really remembering what the book is about, and so I kind of just discover it as I read along. Literally the first chapter where she sees her sister getting pushed in front of a train and die right in front of her. And before the guy flees the scene, he had whispered 2 words to her, which was Bat Eater. And that's kind of like the slur in the narrative world where people believe that it is Chinese people's fault that COVID is a thing. And so now they're calling Chinese people bat eaters because this disease had originated from bats. And so they're saying like, oh, of course Chinese people have spread it because they love to eat bats, as they do with other strange foods that they eat over there. This book also takes place in New York, so it's very apt to what was going on during the pandemic. And I guess even today, because like this is still happening, and it might not even be related to the pandemic. People are just very unhinged like that, where you hear a lot of these stories where people are just pushing others onto the tracks and then they get hit, or people will get randomly punched or assaulted on the subway. And when these things happen to Asian people specifically, you can't help but wonder if it was like racially motivated. Even I myself got punched in the head on the subway when it was just me and this other dude. I don't think me getting punched was racially motivated. I think he and I were just both mentally ill bitches, and he just happened to be more mentally ill than I was. But you know, it was like very disarming. The main girl is definitely very much in turmoil over the death of her sister and the lack of closure of the killer never being caught. The events of the story begin to escalate when she and her co-workers begin to find carcasses of bats in these crime scene cleanups. And there also seems to be a pattern of all of these bodies that they've been cleaning up being East Asian women. This book definitely falls within this hyper niche subgenre that I'm noticing, where it has this very angry, depressed, angsty East Asian main character character who has a lot of resentment about racism and discrimination. And there will be a lot of interiority of the ways that Asian women are dehumanized, whether that's through being a fetish or in this case, literally being blamed for a global pandemic. And I can definitely see how these types of stories might hit for other Asian girls who are angsty like that. It's weird because, you know, as a negative bitch myself, theoretically it would hit for me, but I don't know. I think these types of stories, I find it hard to connect with. I think because sometimes it makes me feel like I'm sitting in an Asian American studies class rather than really truly connecting to it on like an emotional level. But I appreciate that there are stories like this that can be there for other Asian girls to connect with. But I've had the same feeling for this book and like other books that fall within this niche genre. But I have the same feeling for like but I've had the same feeling for this book as I have with other books with like angsty Asian girls. It just doesn't hit for me the same. So I'm sorry to the author. Please don't cancel me for this because I was not as angry and angsty about it. I will say I had read this author's debut book, which did not really hit for me either, but I do think that this new book had clearly shown her improvement in writing compared to her debut. I also think she has strengths in writing horror, so I would be interested to see her improve even more along her author journey and dive further into the horror genre because I really think this is gonna be like her niche. In the meantime, maybe I'll get assaulted on the subway for the second time as karma for, you know, not clicking with this book as much as I should. The next book that I read is a nonfiction called Who Deserves Your Love, and I picked up this book because I had really enjoyed the author's previous book, How to Keep House While Drowning. This author is a therapist, and I think the way that she like approaches therapy and these self-help books is done with so much gentleness and compassion that I really resonate with. As someone who is very negative and self-critical of myself, I need that compassion to help me see the light. So I was interested in picking up this particular book where it's more focused on having healthy and workable relationships, and it doesn't have to be romantic either. It can be familial and platonic as well. And so she talks about things like how to navigate a relationship where this other person, despite their best efforts, are hurting you. When should you step away versus when should you stick it out and actively try to work it out with this person? I like that she clearly outlines these complicated dynamics with how to navigate this, like how do you differentiate between being mistreated versus being abused? And also when you are going through these difficult situations, how do you emotionally regulate yourself? And also how do you establish standards and boundaries in your relationships? Questioning if the relationship that you are in is a reflection of the values that you want to put forward in. So this is a very thoughtful and practical and compassionate kind of book. Unfortunately, it didn't really hit for me as much as her previous book did. And I think that's because I relate more to the issues that she was, you know, trying to resolve for How to Keep House While Drowning, which is basically people who are very overwhelmed with all the shit that they gotta do and they're dealing with executive dysfunction. Whereas this particular book obviously has a different audience altogether. And I think maybe if I were in the middle of like a toxic relationship, like if I had been dating my ex-boyfriend, this would have hit really hard had I been reading the book at the time. Right now, this book doesn't really apply to me because I'm in a loving romantic relationship where I think we communicate in a healthy way. I don't have a relationship with my family, but I don't really have any desire to build a relationship in the first place, so that decision has already been made. And I also have good relationships with my friends, and if I were to have any friends that I believed were like toxic or they mistreated me or whatever, they've already been long gone. So I just think that this book wasn't very applicable to me at this moment, but I can definitely see how it would hit for other people who are on the struggle bus at the present moment. Now, speaking of the struggle bus, the last book that I had finished for the month is Moon-Blooded Breeding Clinic. And so I picked up this book because this is the same author who wrote Morning Glory Milk Farm, which I made a video about a few months ago where it was like this video essay about how the book was actually a deep allegory for capitalism and toxic masculinity, and people really enjoyed that type of video. So I was curious about checking out the author's other books to see if I could make other types of video essays about it. And so this synopsis has stuck out to me, and I thought, maybe there's some commentary to be said here. So we're still going in like monster fucker territory. I think this actually takes place within the same world, and the way that this is set up is that the main guy is a werewolf who has to move move back to his small hometown after things are not going well for his career. He's kind of like in a rut right now, not like a werewolf rut, but like in a life rut. And so he sees this flyer for volunteering at a breeding clinic. This is a very unique service where essentially someone can help trigger a heat and breed with a werewolf in a controlled setting right before the full moon in order to have a much higher success rate of having children compared to multi-species IVF, and it's cheaper than adoption, and it is obviously much more enjoyable than going to a clinic because, you know, you're being bred. So the main girl is someone who wants to have a child, and she's been trying for years. She had a marriage before, but that ended it in divorce. And so now she turns to the Moon-Blooded Breeding Clinic, and she sees the main guy in the catalog and becomes interested. What she doesn't count on is liking him, and they end up having romantic feelings for one another. But now they gotta figure out like how much of it is the contract versus how much of it is genuine feelings, especially once you fulfill the end of the contract. What happens afterward? Like, are they gonna stay together? Does he even want a child himself? I felt similar to this book as I did with the previous book that I read by the author, where like, I don't know if I was really interested in it as a reader, but as a YouTube commentator, I could probably make a video about it. I'll think more deeply about it to see what shenanigans and, you know, silliness of a script that I can write. But in terms of like a reader, I feel like I can't really get into this author's books because despite the monster fucker shenanigans, it's a bit too cozy, small town kind of vibes. The combination of like that vanilla wholesomeness with the raunchy sex scenes for some reason just doesn't click with me. It worked for me for fan service, but it didn't work for me with this author's books. It might be because I really was into the characterization of fan service, where I could really see the characters as like fully fleshed people, whereas the characters in these kinds of books, the only fully fleshed thing I'm seeing is the flesh of their ballsack. So yeah, that might be why it just doesn't hit the same for me. But that's okay, because I, you know, picked up the book with different intentions altogether. So we'll see if I actually execute it. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up the 5 books I read over the past month. For my next month's wrap up, I will have a little bit more variety with the books because there's gonna be a little more fantasy, and if there is a romance, it's still gonna be like within a fantasy world. So I'll dive more into it for the next month. Until then, let me know what books you have read recently that you've enjoyed or didn't hit for you. And if there is a specific topic that you think would be a really good analysis to have for a Moon-Blooded Breeding Clinic, let me know, and I will keep that in my thoughts for potentially scripting the video. I already have some ideas in my mind, but I'm curious what you think I should cover for that book, because, you know, even just the synopsis alone, I feel like there's some parallels here that we could make about our society. Anyway, if you made this far, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Bye! Your parents came in the cul-de-sac, leaned back in a leather-clad seat, pack of spirits in your Prada bag, suburban summer 17.